Welcome, everyone. At Right at Marketing, we talk a lot about how a college university website is often the first impression prospective students, faculty, staff, visitors have of the institution, and how good design and user experience enhances that reputation, conveys the brand's identity, and showcases what the institution is best at. On the contrary, bad design can frustrate and turn people away, diminishing the institution's competitive edge, right as we're entering a really increasingly competitive environment for higher education. To talk about this, I'm joined today by Justin Max, founder of Spark, a user experience design and tech agency. He's worked on projects in higher education, healthcare, retail, finance, among others. Welcome, Justin.
Yeah. Hey, Travis. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We've talked about, you and I, and at Brighted, we talk a lot about how marketing is, how it's organized in higher education and how it's centralized or decentralized, and what that means for how work like this is done. Mm-hmm. One effect that decentralization has on the presentation of brand is how it often reflects sort of internal structures and internal politics rather than like an intuitive presentation of what the institution has to offer. And I'm curious how you approach this when you take on these kinds of projects.
Yeah, it's a really good question. At Spark, whether we're working with a corporate client, a large enterprise corporate client, or an institution of higher learning, it's pretty common actually that the site's structure, especially over time, can start to reflect the internal organization, like the hierarchy of the org chart and how it's established, which can be convenient for internal stakeholders. But if we approach things from a user-centric perspective, it doesn't always align well to what the user actually needs. If I'm looking for an application, does that necessarily align to the internal structure from a org chart standpoint? So at Spark, obviously we're trying to come at things from a user-centric perspective. And so that means starting there. And sometimes that can be hard conversations that are necessary, though, to sort of reorg a site's taxonomy and its navigation structure to align better to those user expectations rather than, just how things are organized at the university or that corporate enterprise.
What do you think it takes to be intentional when approaching design project in this way, being user focused?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at Spark we have a process. We have sort of our go-to best in practice process for how to execute a larger engagement. It's called our ideas process, but at its core, it's about understanding that we have to establish foundationally the right information to be informed to make decisions. So early on in a project, we're trying to get to that foundation, to that structure, and then that kind of becomes a decision framework for as we proceed. We keep checking back to that. So it's a strategic exercise up front, and it needs to be collaborative. We have to make sure that we're incorporating the voice of internal stakeholders. At the school, we need to make sure we have all voices at the table, and there's several exercises that we take to make sure that happens. At the earliest stages, it's just about being engaged from the project brief through to the project initiation, making sure we truly understand the hopes and dreams of the school and what they're trying to execute on. Being intentional about the outcomes that we're looking to drive. At the end of the day, it's not good enough that the site is more attractive. It has to convert on the metrics that we're looking to improve on. So at the outset, it's a lot of communication and just being on the same page. From there, we're trying to do things that map back to that. And so we have to, as a design organization, a technology organization, we have to solution at the intersection of the business needs and then the end user needs. So we have to come come at it from those two sides. So we're trying to understand what the organization is looking to execute on, and then we're also trying to understand, well, who are you connecting with? What is their day-to-day like? What do they hope and dream for themselves? And so brand, UX design, UI design, navigation design all has to hit at that intersection of those two important viewpoints. So for us, it's just about keeping those things in mind, balancing them out, and making sure both have a voice at the table as we get started before we get tactical in terms of designing screens and layouts, writing copy, putting things into code. It all has to come from a solid strategic foundation.
Picking up from what you said just now about metrics, I wonder if you think higher education has the right sort of model of what success is in the web. I've just spent a lot of time, generating reports on sort of views and engagement, but there's more to a site than that. And I wonder how you talk about, what success means.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, again, for us, it's because we're a user experience shop. We're thinking about, obviously there's the dollars and cents side of things that any organization has to think about to be viable and successful. So that's sort of table stakes. From there, though, we're thinking about, well, can we increase engagement, like you mentioned? Can we increase loyalty to the brand? And do we see that through things like, donations or a positive response from an alumni network? Do we see things like time on task decrease? So if I'm a prospective student, I'm looking for certain information, maybe it's information in a course catalog. Do I see the time on that task decrease post solution? So again, it kind of depends on like the state of the experience as we enter the work. In some cases, maybe that course catalog is actually in a good place, right? And we're not going to focus there necessarily. We might focus a bit more on the path to submitting an application and reducing friction there, so that's easy to do. So for us, it's a custom solution each time. But yeah, obviously we want to assess the current state, understand those outcomes, and then look to improve those metrics. But to your point, we have to dig a little deeper than just things like engagement and volume of application and that sort of thing.
You've worked in other areas besides higher education, retail, e-commerce. I'm wondering if you have any sort of ideas from those areas that you think would work well in higher ed, just in terms of functionality or how you approach people.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. For myself personally, I cut my teeth in e-com. So the interesting thing there is e-commerce is really a digital product. You are constantly trying to move the levers in terms of experience and UI, and obviously on the marketing side, to figure out how you can get incremental dollars out of this e-commerce engine. So that gives you a lot of lessons that you can apply across all kinds of industries, about figuring out what are the small tweaks that can be made. Sometimes it's not always a big splash. It can be a site experience can suffer from sort of a death by 1,000 cuts scenario, where it's a misplaced action item here. It's a contrast design issue there. It is a copy problem here. In aggregate, they create additional friction for someone moving through a task that they want to complete. So at the end of the day, it's reducing conversion on that e-commerce site. Same things can be applied to a higher ed experience, right? Yes, you've inspired me on the homepage. This feels like my tribe. This feels like it will create opportunity for the future me. But if I start to move from the inspiration moment on a homepage to want to find out some important information much deeper in the site experience, if I hit roadblocks, speed bumps along the way, am I likely to not get that information? Am I likely to have a lesser impression of the institution? Potentially. And does that mean that someone who was considering your school starts to look elsewhere? Potentially. So those lessons that we learned in ecom about trying to identify all the points of friction through the funnel, through a conversion funnel, can definitely be applied to higher ed for sure.
When you're, in your early meetings and going through how the project is going to unfold, do you discuss organizational design? And to your point about these sites should not be static, coming from e-commerce. And a lot of times in colleges, they can take a while for things to be updated. It has to go through various departments. We talked about decentralization at the beginning. Is it something you address and giving them ideas on how to set up their internal organization to be successful?
Yeah, so there's kind of two ways that can happen. One is just in terms of how do you organize content in the site experience, and that gets into the labeling and classification of content, and that's taxonomy. And we do things like tree testing, which is testing a site structure to make sure it makes sense to an end user, right? And then that gets represented in terms of navigation. But I think what you're getting at more is on the governance and maintenance side of things. So we won't go in and tell an institution like, you should change your org structure to XYZ. But we will make recommendations on, if you want to maintain the integrity of what our solution is that we're excited about, that we believe will convert at a higher rate, that will achieve your metrics, you have to be extremely careful that over time, you're maintaining that the integrity of the solution that we've all arrived at. It's not just about the design firm or the technology firm trying to protect their case study. It's about trying to protect the solution. And so you have to understand at the onset, well, who's managing this experience? What is the current approval processes for pushing content live? How frequent is that happening? And then as we design a solution, you have to keep that in mind, right? We do not want to design a solution that then at the end of the day, the team doesn't have the resources to actually keep up with. And also you want to be clear about the rules about content strategy, content guidelines, image guidelines, right? And then how does that go through workflows and approval processes on the back end in the content management system? Whatever tech stack you're on, you want to make sure that there's checks in the process. So there's content creators, reviewers, approvers, and you have a clear governance model for the site experience. And that's what's going to maintain that integrity over the long haul.
Yeah, certainly something we discuss a lot. I appreciate you coming on and talking with us. As higher ed gets more online, I think this is something that's going to be talked about a lot.
Yeah, appreciate the time and the ability to share some perspective. I hope it helps.